I would now like to call the tab board meeting for July 23rd at 6:01. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Transportation Advisory Board is in person. Staff are members of the public, maybe attending virtually or in person. Staff, do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum tonight. Also, Ali and Carlos will be serving as regular members.
First item of business is to take action to approve the minutes for the June 25th, 2025 town meeting. Are there any corrections to the draft meeting minutes provided in the agenda? Seeing none, consider the minutes approved as presented. Our next item of business is public comment. Staff, has anyone signed up?
Chair, no one has signed up to make public comment.
Okay.
There's also no folks online as well.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, hearing none, we will move to item number 4, regular business. First presentation is multimodal transportation concurrency, transit level of service policy. We have 2 items under regular business. The one I just mentioned. We'll start with that. The presenter will be Kendra Brayland. And then she's the administration's consultant. And did I take your? Did you consult? You good? Consultant group. Fear and Pierce. Fair and Pierce. Fair and Pierce. German. And please go.
Oh, great. Me actually, look, this came up quicker than I thought, but glad for that. So good evening. And actually, I think Jillian, you were going to start the presentation, right?
Yeah, I'll take us off briefly if that's okay. So, hi everyone, we're back today to talk about transportation concurrency and specifically the transit level of service policy that we introduced in May. With us today, we have John Mortensen and Thomas Valdries, and obviously Kenny Smith as well. And she'll be taking the bulk of the presentation when we get to the administration's proposal for the transit level of concurrency. So in May, we introduced a really high-level version of some of the changes we might propose to the transit LOS, and we're back today to make that a little bit more concrete. And the question we'll be seeking your feedback on is up on the screen. Do you agree with the recommendation to include mobility, place, and access consideration for tiers of transit service based on frequency and ridership? Sorry. Okay. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an update on where this project is kind of in its evolution and timeline and where it's going to be. So this is our last big policy touch point with TAB. The last time we're asking your feedback on a proposed policy. Next time we come to you in August, we'll be coming to you with the red lines or the draft changes to the mobility action plan and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan that reflect all of your discussion and feedback on those proposed policy changes. So this is kind of the last big policy touch point. It'll then go to the Planning and Policy Commission and several council committees where both the kind of document changes and the policy proposals will be discussed at varying points throughout this fall. And then we're shooting for a November adoption at City Council with the rest of the comprehensive plan changes that are proposed. So that's where we're going. And I think I just want to highlight this as our last big policy touch point with this group. Okay, so our current transit level of service, like we discussed last time, is really, or in May, is really based on what it looks like when you arrive at a bus stop, what amenities are there, and how many amenities are there. And we score each bus stop based on the rubric that you see on the screen. And bus stops that have, in general, a higher number of points receive a higher score on our level of service. This isn't tied to our concurrency policy, or isn't tied to concurrency, in that developments don't pass or fail concurrency on the basis of how a bus stop near them scores. Okay. So this map on the screen, which I know is a little bit small, maps our current bus stops and where they're at with our current level of service mapping. So anything that's green has 10 or more points based on transit level of service policy and the amenities that are present there. Anything that's yellow or red has fewer amenities. So you can see that this really only takes into account what's physically present at the bus stop, not how people get to that bus stop, not what ridership is like there. So with that, okay. So when we were examining concurrency as a whole through part of this project, we recognized the opportunity to address our transit LOS to better account for some of those access, frequency, and ridership considerations. So there's a goal in the MIP, and I will just take a moment to read it because I think it'll kind of ground why we're pursuing this change. The goal is to advance the transit system to connect the region and improve access to transit for all community members. Our current LOS system does part of this. It tells you what your experience is like at the bus stop, but it doesn't do everything that it could. I think it's also important to note that the city is constrained by the fact that we don't operate our transit. King County Metro and Sound Transit are the operators. So Kendra, in just a moment, we'll be talking about where we want to go with transit level of service, but we do have some constraints based on the fact that we don't operate our system. So that was a pretty quick overview of what we've covered to date. And now I'll hand it over, or actually I can cover the feedback as well. So last time we brought these high level considerations to you, we kind of grouped the feedback into these larger categories. We heard that you all were interested in including potential bus stop or route usage as part of the LOS policy. Because of the way our planning data breaks down geographically, we don't get to a low enough level to actually break out certain bus stops or routes by potential or future planned ridership. So we aren't able to incorporate that into our policy, but you will see actual ridership incorporated into the policy, which is a change. Second, there were questions about actual bus stop usage. You'll see this incorporated into the place considerations in the policy that Kendra is about to talk about. There were also questions about how usable the amenities were at each bus stop. The reality is that Sound Transit and Metro own those bus stops and the amenities, and it isn't within the city's ability to operate and maintain them or to change kind of that service. So we are able to track the usability of those amenities. So you won't see that incorporated. You will see safety and lighting incorporated under that place kind of category. So that was a quick run through to Kendra.
Okay, well, thank you and good evening. So as Jillian noted, we're here to really look for ways to kind of upgrade your transit level of service policy, really to kind of project kind of the city's desires for transit. I think it's really important to note that transit level of service policies, that what we're putting together here, these are projecting and telegraphing city desires, but something that we need to recognize is the city of Issaquah cannot guarantee the service levels. The city of Issaquah is not a transit service provider. Actual transit service is going to largely be determined by transit agency budgets and funding decisions. But as somebody who practices all over the region, works with a lot of cities that are advocating for increased transit service, you're much more likely to get it when you're actively taking actions to advocate for it. So that's why we've crafted this very robust transit level of service policy, and in large part based on the very good feedback we received from this group back in May, and continuing to work directly with city staff over the last couple of months. So, before I kind of present this, I just want to state that, this transit level service policy doesn't drive concurrency, but it is very useful in establishing planning intent and also guiding city advocacy with transit agencies. So again, if you don't ask, you're almost guaranteed not to get what you want. So let's start by at least telling the transit agencies what we want. And I just maybe to remove the curtain from King County Metro or Sound Transit, sound like these big agencies. honestly, there are people that are trying their best to allocate service around the region, and they really rely on local agencies to telegraph for that one thing. So that's what we're trying to set a really strong foundation for here. So as we're going to go in, and everyone in front of you, you have this handy dandy tables which describe, in a lot of detail, the transit level service policy. It also provides some maps. We'll talk about those in a minute, but just as a reminder, what is this? What do these transit level service policies speak to? First, there's 3 service types. Frequent service. So you think about that as kind of a transit technology. I want to be agnostic between whether it's a train or a bus that's showing up, at 15-minute frequencies. It's reliable. It's provided, this type of service is provided most of the hours of the day, whether it's 16 to 24 hours, and generally 7 days a week. So, these are, high speed and high reliability, high frequency types of transit service. Just to kind of spell any myths, we don't actually have that in Issaquah today, but we want it. And we want to provide kind of guidance on what that looks like and where we'd like to see it in Issaquah. Secondly, we're talking about a second transit service type. It's regular bus service. So this is fixed route service. Ideally, it's arriving, every half an hour or so during most of the hours of the day, again, 12 to 18 hours a day, most days of the week. We'd love to see it 7 days. Sometimes it's more like 5 days, but this is, just your most traditional, typical fixed route transit service. It's, really kind of the bread and butter when it comes to transit service providers. So we want to definitely speak to that. That's definitely a piece of the puzzle in Issaquah. And then the third service type that we want to talk about is going to be on-demand service. And that's recognizing that there are parts of the city that it's probably difficult for fixed route service to service, whether it's that your densities are low, whether there's kind of a street network that isn't connected enough. But there are always going to be parts, particularly in a beautiful, hilly, natural city like Issaquah, there are going to be pieces of that. But we recognize that we have members of our community that transit is really important. They can't drive themselves. They don't have regular access to a car for whatever reason. And so we definitely want to advocate for mobility for those folks as well. So those are kind of the 3 transit service types that our local service policies speak to. And then for those transit service types, so we'll go into more details in a minute, what's in this, but it's really kind of thinking through these kind of 3 buckets again. Jillian presented mobility, so thinking about speed and reliability of that transit service, access, so how are people getting to it, specifically thinking about pedestrian and bike access to those services. And the cool thing about this multimodal concurrency is we're speaking a lot to bike and pedestrian local service, or about how we tie that into thinking about access, and then place. And that's building from your current transit local service policy. You're already talking about stop and station amenities. We do feel that a piece of that is appropriate, so we provided some guidance here. So we're already on the slide here, which is great, talking through the specifics of these service types, just to maybe walk through them in a little bit more detail. From the perspective of frequent service from a mobility standpoint, the kinds of measures that we're looking at here, we have an issue with this table. We talk about kind of the policy aspect. We talk about performance measures that we're thinking about, and then actions that the city can take. And I think it's important to really highlight that caveat where practical and feasible. This isn't one size fits all. So really, again, that this level of service policy is not concurrency driven, but we'd like this, kind of policy guidance to be really prominent for decision makers. And as the city of Issaquah is doing projects, we want this to be front of mind so that this can be incorporated into your corridor studies or any infrastructure projects that you guys are doing. Also front of mind for decision makers, should they be an ETP or other forums around the region, and they can be really kind of speaking to a consistent goal for the city of Issaquah. So for frequent service, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about transit travel times that are competitive with auto travel. So thinking about what can the city do in terms of actions could be transit signal priority, retrofitting your roads to really think about ways that you're really making transit vehicles move in a reliable way. Advocating for, again, that sub 15-minute frequencies or headways, I should say, for transit, like really advocating that we are getting true high frequency service in Issaquah 7 days a week, most of the days per week. From the perspective of place, we added some additional detail to your current level of service policy to really speak to amenities we'd like to see at bus stops where you have more than 25 daily boardings. So we looked through the King County Metro guidelines for stops and added some details about things like leaning rails and lighting and signage and trash cans, a little bit more detail than you had before. And then in terms of expanding prior access, this is really kind of tied to the level of service policy that we already established for pedestrians. So really constructing sidewalks and trails that are connecting to transit stops, implementing enhanced street crossings, prioritizing low stress bicycle facilities within 3/4 mile of transit stops, and also just thinking about transit access or constrained curb management. So that's for high frequency transit. We'll put there for regular service, and I'm not going to read every word here, I promise. But from a mobility standpoint, just really advocating for consistent service, hopefully at 30-minute frequencies. Again, most days of the week, most hours of the day. Again, specifying the types of stop and station amenities we'd like to see when there are more than 25 riders per day. And then at a given bus stop, and then also tying again to our pedestrian full service policy, just making sure that we're thinking about pedestrian access to transit stops. For tier 3 on-demand services, this is really what we need, again, advocating for, and to stress this is a King County Metro program. The city is certainly a partner, but really advocating for flexible services that folks can access. So how can we help in publicizing it? How can we really think about ways that we're essentially filling in those gaps for folks that don't have access to, easy access to fixed route transit. Jillian, if you can just go to the next few slides, I just want to show the map. So the table kind of projects what we'd expect for each of these service types. And then these maps in your packet and kind of on the slides here show what we have today and then what we'd like to see in the future. So to speak to what we have today, again, we don't have high frequency service in Issaquah, so tier 1 does not exist currently. It's really tier 2 service and on-demand service. So what we've shown here is we've mapped out where your bus routes are, where those stops are, and also where the on-demand flexible service area is. And again, that's that King County Metro program. And then if you can go to the next slide, Jillian, I just want to show kind of our vision, what we're trying to state here. First of all, we've highlighted in kind of the dark blue lines that we'd like to see, kind of like to see high frequency service rather than just regular service. So upgrade frequencies. Also, looking at the slide here, you can see kind of the yellow, we're filling it. We'd love to see on-demand service provided everywhere in the city, not just in that area, covering Issaquah Highlands, covering some of those areas of the city that are currently not included. So that's something the city can advocate for. Again, this is not a promise that will occur, but again, projecting that desire. So I think that's map, and I think I've got one more kind of slide here before we open up the conversation. The other thing that we really want to do is to really be thinking about how much of Issaquah in terms of households and employees can access transit service. So really what we've done is we've mapped out how many jobs, how many households within Issaquah are within a half or 1/4 mile walk shed or a 3/4 mile bike shed of bus stops. So fortunately, particularly from the perspective of employment, most are. From a household perspective, not as much being within that 1/4 mile watershed. So that's just something that we want the city to kind of track over time. And the aspiration here would be for those percentages to go up over time. And that can be done through densification and developing in areas near transit. That can be done through advocacy for more transit service. That can also be achieved through transportation improvements that reduce that watershed. So.
All right, I think we're ready to hear from all of you. So we have the question up on the slide here, but if there are any clarifying questions, I think we've done this in the past where we can ask those first, then get into a little bit more of discussion.
One question is, first round, will we clarify?
Yeah. Yes, one clarifying question. On the bike facilities within 3/4 mile, can I assume that means like building out a network of bike lanes or bike paths to access transit?
Yes.
And not like, build a bike rack 3/4 mile away from transit.
No. I mean, your point is very, very good. I mean, just in our measure, it's fairly simplistic. So yes, you could take it to you're constructing anything, but I think it is thought in terms of accessing transit. We did the bike little service like that was something certainly as we're looking at those desired low stress bike sheds. Definitely there's a strong emphasis towards it.
There might be an opportunity to word that slightly more clearly.
I appreciate that.
Well, mine's somewhere between clarifying and discussion. So wait until this clarifying is complete.
Anyone else?
So in that schedule means that 25% of the city do not have proximity less than 3/4 mile to buses. Is that what it means? Between the 76% and the 100%?
So yes, thank you. So just to I should have oriented you to what we're looking at in this table. So this table essentially presents both households and jobs, and it presents and population, and it presents the population that's within a 1/4 mile watershed of bus stops. So you've got 36% of your population that's within a 1/4 mile watershed. You've got 41% of your households that's within the 1/4 mile watershed, and 70% of your jobs that are within the 1/4 mile watershed. Within the bike shed, we've got 3/4 of your population, 80% of your households, and 95% of your jobs that are within. So we haven't stated a goal. Could state the goal is, I don't know that it would be 100% because you've got existing households, so probably not. But the goal is for those percentages to go up, to increase access.
That's like, understanding that's 25% of the population do not have that. Right?
That are not within, what I would
Yeah.
say is they're not within that easy access.
Okay. Fair enough.
And this is just a depiction of existing conditions. I would
Sure.
not state this.
Sure.
Bigger hybrid issues.
I guess the overall, I don't know, I lose track of the fact that generally the answer to this question is yes. I just had a couple of maybe comments for consideration about how to maybe fine tune some of the language to capture more precisely what we're looking for. And I don't know what form this gets in when it goes to the next stage, but a couple things. I'm kind of focused on the low stress bike facility. So I had a couple of things to say about that. One is we have LTS 1, 2, 3, 4. Wouldn't we want to just use that language and say LTS 1 or 2 or something to that, just to make sure we're mapping to others? The other thing is not all miles on a bike are created equal. And I don't know if this is overcomplicating things, but I do believe in reality it is highly relevant. A 3/4 mile bike ride on flat terrain with a facility is very different from a 3/4 mile ride from, the hospital in the Highlands down to Sunset in front. So without getting things extra complicated, there's some way to capture not just distance, but some other way to describe accessibility.
That is a really good, and as you will recall, our analysis looking at both topography and stress levels. So it feels like you're saying this map here is too simplistic.
It's a little blunt for the bike. And I do appreciate that. And so because this is a benchmark that we may or may not look, if it's not set in stone yet as a benchmark, I would think it would be useful to, if it's not too terribly complex, there's an easy way to capture some of the difficulty of, we have a flat valley and very steep walls. So 3/4 of a mile just is not the most precise way to describe access on a bike, in my opinion.
Yep.
Although for practical reasons, then we may have to live with that. I just wanted to bring that up to see if there was some easy way to capture some of the accessibility.
Say there's a thoughtful way, and we could definitely tie in. So I appreciate that feedback. We'll look into what we can do with that.
That was Oh, I'm sorry. And I have one more thing about that. And that's the other thing about 3/4 of a mile. It may be that, and you may have already done this, but if it's 7/8 of a mile, but it captures a high density multi-family development, it just seems like I would hate for that score to just be like right next to a whole. Look at the apartment complex on Dogwood Street. There's a lot of people that rely on transit, I'm sure, within that pretty big complex. And I don't know, not a good example because it's within the 3/4 miles of at least several bus stops. But I'm just thinking that, is there any way to capture also not just absolute distance, but just to make sure that we're not missing something that's just a mile away, but maybe high density, and maybe it's already in there. Maybe that's not.
I think your previous comment maybe gets at that. And I would say, so let's play out your example for a moment. You have a major apartment complex that's not within that. I think there's some response, and we show it's like, oh gosh, you've got a lot of you've got this high density area that would really benefit from access to transit. It would be pretty nice if we had a figure that kind of shows that, like, hey, they're not within that. So that gives us some policy.
Maybe the reverse is more interesting. How many higher density areas are outside these defined areas? That would be something I'd want to. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, kind of round robin this, but I guess we can start with Karen.
I just had a response to that, which is I feel like that information is at least somewhat captured in the difference between the population percent and the household percent, because you can kind of see density here. Sure. Because presumably because there's more households than population in the area, a lot of the households that are in the area are less dense, right?
I'm not talking about density per household. I'm talking about household per acre. I'm not sure if I'm talking about the same. The difference between population and household would tell you how many people are in each household.
Within the area versus outside of the area, which tells you whether the area is covering more dense housing, which I thought was your question.
Don't think that's true. If you're losing track, you can have single family housing with 5 kids and your population will be high. Housing density will be low. If you have a big 1 acre parcel, the house that's 5 people. I don't want to get too lost in this, but I think
you still get some of it. I think I'm
talking about households I'm talking about multifamily developments. In other words, apartments, more dense units.
That would
Units
necessarily.
per acre.
Units per acre, yes, as opposed to people living in the house. But you may be right, the first point, you may be right, it may already be captured in some other way. I just wanted to bring it up because I was sort of envisioning, I just want to make sure we don't lose track of multifamily housing that doesn't have access to transit. That's really what my point is.
Yes. No,
What were you saying in response to that it might be true, like, we wanna say we need to increase transit because we're not capturing that might be like 0.78 away.
I think that if we, and I really like that idea of relooking at these buffers and thinking about, kind of the topography and some of that. So I want to say, but with that number, wherever it is, I think what it tells us is that we have some areas that aren't being served. They're not within a reasonable walking or biking distance of transit. And so the types of policy responses, talk to King County Metro, have them redirect their route. Maybe they can, add some service. Maybe they can, divert the route a little bit to get closer to that.
So maybe it says to say like, oh, this should, that's one advocate.
Correct. And I think just information is helpful to you.
So we can start with, if you have any general thoughts, question that you want to answer here. If
Just go back to the
yeah, that's
question.
great if we can go back and help us guide the discussion. Yeah, the three aspects: mobility, place, and access.
Yes, right.
Adam?
Yeah, so I think I want to start, Kendra, I really appreciate your perspective on this, which is that a lot of what we're doing is advocating for what we want, and step one is setting a vision for what we want. I think that's great. And I see that so many of the actions on our chart are advocate for what we want. So that's a good step. There's a question about how we're going to be effective in advocating for what we want. And it seems to me that that's going to align with how is King County Metro and Sound Transit and whoever else we're relying on to do the work or to take the action to set up our vision or to establish it. What is their prioritization? What is their process? And how do we take action that best sets us up for being effective in our advocacy? So I might ask, what are the top three actions that we would take that set us up for that? And then do those align with the actions that are on this list? Are those going to set us up for success in that advocacy?
Start with
Yeah, I can maybe take a stab here. So I think the first step is really this transit level of service policy. And we can sort of elaborate this more in the transportation element and the mobility action plan that will be forthcoming through all this. But yeah, we are relying on like Metro's service. They do have guidelines. So this is kind of the first step. We are saying that we are in alignment with their own guidelines. We are like formalizing this from the city, and we're gonna like sort of apply the pressure formally, but then also twice a year Metro will do service adjustments. So those are good check-in points with them to say, okay, here's our guidelines. I know you like chat with us 2 times a year. So like we can advocate for adjustments then. That's sort of the time that they're willing to make small adjustments. And then also, as evidenced by the city, we currently are putting some funds into MetroFlex. So we have skin in the game. So we are saying, here's our standards. Here's the time that we are gonna like chat with you twice a year. Also, we have skin in the game, and in the mobility action plan, we talk about ways that we can sort of work with Metro in instances where like we do have the ability to support. Not to say that we're gonna like heavily support because they're the ones that provide service. But we have done certain things just to make sure that we can sort of make those betterments that would benefit the community.
Okay, so if our transit level of service is sort of that upper level vision setting, should it have an action in there that says, make sure we're on top of exactly the schedule that King County Metro is advocating, right? And then, the planning sort of follows from.
Sure, and maybe that's sort of outside of the concurrency discussion, but maybe that's an action that is added to the mobility action plan that says, work with Metro during service adjustment periods to sort of make adjustments.
Yeah, and related to that, since they have the processes, and we're sort of setting up a set of actions here, we're duplicating it. We're doing anything that's basically, we're doing it because it's a best practice that they have, and maybe if they change it, maybe out of step with them. Something to think about.
In order to get any.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I don't know from previous experience in other cities and other projects, would safety be added when we're talking about access and stuff like that, a factor that can be added? In some projects in other cities, people were concerned about access and the pathway along certain time in the day when it comes to safety. That's something that can be considered. That's my.
I didn't maybe to start by answering. I mean, it was my perception that we kind of have covered it, both in the stop amenities, lighting being one of those things, and then in providing sidewalk and low stress or LOS or LTS 1-2 type connections that might lead to safety. I don't know if there is something else you were hoping to see.
No, yeah, I expect that would. Yeah, okay.
I have one question, which was another comment but I have one question, which was, which of these things can the city take direct action on? Like related to this.
I think the direct action comes with mostly advocacy, given that we don't provide the service ourselves. On-demand service, we are supporting currently. So I guess in that way, that is the most direct support that the city is providing. But the city is also providing like staff support, during the times we do chat with Metro twice a year. So yeah, I guess.
In that, is there no way for the city to provide like bus stop amenities, or at least amenities geared to where bus stops are? That seems like the sort of thing that would be possible, considering that the city has a unit domain in those areas oftentimes.
Yeah, the challenge here is that Metro owns and operates all of the things that are sort of supported around the stop. So there are not many cities that actually like purchase equipment and then give it to Metro. That's not really like something that cities traditionally do. One, it sort of sets precedent that we're going to do that, and then Metro sort of says, "Oh, like we don't have to do that anymore." So like, cool. So it is an added cost to the city in an area that Metro should be doing. Yeah.
I think I'd also point you to the access portion of the transit LOS, thinking about how people walk and bike to these facilities is within the city's control a lot of the times, and we're addressing that now that we have.
And the only other one I would add is and I know it's kind of a partnership, but if you wanted transit priority queue jump type, the city owns and operates streets, city owns and operates, its sidewalks and its bike facilities. So I would say as those are some of the things that are in our control, but how many buses are thrown down or sent down those streets by Metro and how frequently those buses arrive, unfortunately, that's not in the city's control. But things that we can do to really get Metro to want to serve us is to site as many people nearby those transit stops as possible. But those densities, those are things that generate ridership.
I think we're constantly looking for ways to have win-win solutions. So like overall, that is the goal, but we aren't necessarily trying to sort of assume all the role that Metro is doing. We want to come at it from like a partnership. So a lot of this is negotiation, and we're constantly like having conversations with Metro. Many of our elected like regional transit committees, they meet monthly. There's constant conversations about sort of adjustments that could be made. So yeah, amenities at bus stops are certainly things that like we can partner on, especially like we, for example, are improving access. We're laying a sidewalk. If the pavement is still wet and we've coordinated, they can come in and like put the like shelter there. And that's like a great thing that we're like trying to like do moving forward. So
I don't want to take too much time. Can I say the other thing?
Okay.
The other thing is I was wondering, because I was looking at this analysis and people were maybe talking about the prospect of moving bus stops. Has there been an analysis done like this where you try multiple different layouts and try to see if there were other possible layouts of stops that would maximize the people within the area? Is that something that's being done?
yeah, that's something that Metro does. They have a service team. John and I are actually just talking to them like a couple of weeks ago. A lot of it has to do with more than just like serving people. It also has like safety components, like the roadway geometry. If you're creating a blind spot and like, you know, thinking about how people are going to access the stop. If there's a blind spot, like, and people are, oh, like my bus is coming, I need to like get there. Like I see it all the time where I live. People like run across the street to like try to get to their bus. So thinking about like all the access ways that somebody like would try to access the bus. It's also about like physically connecting people. Metro has, you know, different thresholds for like bus stop spacing depending on the like, I guess for lack of a better term, like the tier of bus service. So yeah, all these things are considered. There's not really like a perfect formula for it, but Metro does their best to think about like the location of all their other buses and then who might be accessing, and then safety is pretty big.
I agree with the.
I do too. I am hearing a lot of, the concerns that I'm hearing are about like the how behind advocating, and it feels like we want to see that reflected in the LOS. And I guess I don't know if, my question is if that's I mean, I guess it does serve the purpose of advocating, but like building that in, there's a disconnect in my brain of, to me, I think advocacy means one thing, and this is standards, but it's not like I'm wrestling with it. That's maybe my feedback in that way. I'm also very good at we talked about it in the last meeting about how that is one of the ways that the city advocates is if there's already city construction happening near a stop, whatever, you all as city staff are with Metro, hey, we're doing this. This would be like good opportunity for you to, and that's maybe a way to even kind of say jump the line of like the queue, but just because they have their list of what they can get to in a given year.
Yeah, I think like at a minimum, we can just add additional language. You know, this will ultimately live in the transportation element in the mobility action plan. We can add more language to sort of describe like the processes that the city does to advocate. You know, ultimately, we're all trying to be like shepherds of like public funds. So we're constantly chatting with Metro and other agencies to see like where we can you know, coordinate when we're working together on projects. So we can sort of talk more on that. Ultimately, a lot of it is just like sort of operational based, but we can give a high level on like some of the strategies that we use to do that.
Is that in doing this and like cementing it, having this for the first time, that is a way that we are advocating. That's this time metal.
Just make a couple extra bonus.
Yeah, that's a good side.
Sure. Sorry, I just, I was thinking about Hanny's comment, and as I think about the way this makes its way into the transportation element and so forth, and the narrative that comes, I do think that it would be nice if safety is spelled out. Because I do think your point, I agree with your point. I think it does address safety, but the word safety, I mean, I always think about like the people that go after us, and like, you know, we just want to make that crystal clear. It is a core component of the element itself in terms of goals, policies, or whatever. The other one is there's always a conversation about what's not in our control, and even when we were asked about it, so there's not much in our control, but there is actually quite a bit in our control. And so I do think the language, as it makes its way into the narrative form, should call out, and then that's going to help remind decision makers, council, you know, like there are things that are in our control. So I would love to love to see the language reflecting an acknowledgement of what is not, but also don't forget there are a bunch of things that are in our control. And it would just be nice that that's because it's really easy to be like, well, we can't do much about it. It's not in our control. But like, go to the next level. It'd just be kind of nice to have it expressed that way. Things are in control, things are not.
Sure. And one thing I will just add on the topic of safety, King County met, I think it was 2 weeks ago, to have a safety summit specifically for transit. That's been a huge topic this year. There's been a lot of like, high visibility things that have happened in the region. So a lot of that is just sort of to address a lot of these concerns. Countywide, there's been a lot of coordination, both in terms of like policing and like non-sworn officers. Metro is doing a lot more in this field. I think I heard that most of the bus stops, if not all of them, are now getting like a level 3 clean, which means like they're going out and like actually like power washing and like really cleaning. So like beyond just safety, there's like the cleanliness and like the security portion. So at least like right now, that's just a huge topic. There is currently like just a lot of emphasis on it. King County is looking to like sort of raise funds to do that and really prioritize like making sure that the experience of being on a bus is like much better than it has been. So I'm happy to like add some additional language.
So when the grant application, the grant evaluators like, how many times did they say safety in this application?
Yeah, I'm happy to add more language to the mobility action plan and the transportation element to sort of reflect that additional sort of layer of preference and goal that we have that also aligns with King County. So
it sounds like there's like a moment happening for safety, and this is just a good time to tap it.
Yeah, so a couple of things came up in discussion. Let's see. First, Cynthia, I think when you were talking about the density of neighborhoods that are accessible, it seems to me there's room to maybe put an optimization statement in here. We have the performance measure under expanding rider access for the number of households and jobs that can access stops. There's another element of that, which is cost of doing so. And I can imagine that King County is looking at prioritizing based on something like return on investment. At how many additional people can I get by the next bus stop? And so having a prioritized list or some other method of prioritizing our increase in transit that aligns with what the agencies are actually going to build, that would be potentially really helpful to have in here as an action or a performance measure. The other thing that popped up was in Lumir's discussion, we talked about a little bit about citing new development close to transit, which is sort of flipping the script a little bit. I think typically in a lot of city documents, there's an implicit relationship where we decide where the development is going to go and then figure out transit happens there. But in practice, we kind of do both at the same time. And there might be room for adding some actions and some prioritization here in basically advocating for the planning and zoning that the city does to align with our future vision of transit, to kind of make all the problems easier to solve at the same time.
I was mostly going to second what Cynthia said about like putting stress on the things the city can control rather than the things that the city just has to advocate for. Because I'm sure that there is headway to be made by advocating, but I think that the city should, in the absence of that, focus on the things that the city can control to increase the transit accessibility and things like that. Because I think that's very important to do. I also wanted to second what Alex said about putting in kind of more language about aligning the zoning with this plan, especially if we have a specific plan to try to get higher service in this area. I think it'd be that plan would be more likely to be accepted by the regional agencies if we had in place, like there's going to be high density development here because they are. So, I agree.
Steph, you gotten what you need to out of this discussion?
Yeah, thank you all for your feedback. So we'll return in August with those the changes to the mobility action plan and transportation element of the comprehensive plan. I think you'll see some changes to the transit level of service around some of those the bike LTS items that were mentioned at the top, and you'll see some more information about advocacy, how we would do that, and the differentiation of what's in our control versus not in some of that language. And I took copious notes about everything else as well, so we'll be considering that. So thank you.
Yeah, our next item on the agenda is to receive a presentation reviewing the board's work plan, and this will be presented on
Great, thank you, Chair. This presentation should be pretty quick. I'm just sort of reviewing what we have next happening this year. So we have done a whole lot. We are now at the mid-year, which is pretty amazing. So first thing we'll notice under administrative items, in September, we have election of officers. You may recall that we just elected officers, but we made a couple adjustments when our city clerk came, and we sort of walked through the reasons why it might be better to begin electing officers after a couple months where there's new members. So in September, we will be doing that. Under general items, we have some more things that we're working on. So first thing is going to be the mobility action plan and transportation element updates. And this will be at the August meeting. And this is essentially another continuation of this conversation. You'll see sort of the red line version of all the text that will be going is proposed in the mobility action plan and transportation element. So a lot of it has to do with concurrency, but we did sort of publish our previous mobility action plan and transportation element about a year ago. So there's going to be a couple of just like sort of administrative things. Also, like we've done a lot of good work, so we're just removing things from the list that we've already done. So after that, I'm excited to say I will come back and I will bring the Central Issaquah Station Alignment Study introduction. So this will be the 6th board and commission that I have done my presentation to. I'm really hoping to get a ton of feedback. This study is going to take place between now and the end of 2026. It's going to have multiple phases, And yeah, I'm just excited to introduce this study and sort of talk about the touch points that the tab will have. I'm also happy to give just one-on-ones if anybody wants to talk light rail, which is something that I'm really excited about. So, but yeah, just know in August there will be that conversation. In September, I'll bring a report card. So hoping to translate the mobility action plan into a spreadsheet form and just sort of talk about what progress we've made, what progress we need to make, and sort of like how things are going. Ultimately, the goal is to have this published on a web page for the city. We're using Power BI as like a data visualization. That's just sort of the standard thing that the city has been using. So yeah, just we'll see what form this takes by the time that Tab sees it, but ultimately that will be sort of the end result via Power BI page. In October, we will have a joint meeting with the Equity Board. So that should be a really good meeting, talking about the ICAP update. We have a couple members from TAB who are on the working group. So maybe they can tag in and sort of talk about the presentation a little bit, sort of the work that has been going on for the last 6 months or so. And then the other topic will be looking at equity data and how that's used in the transportation improvement program project scoring. So both those topics are going to be pretty heavy lifts. So I expect the October meeting will probably run exactly on time, if not a little bit over. So should be a very lively discussion of both of those topics. In December, we will have more progress done on the light rail study. We should have the initial evaluation criteria. I'll talk about this a little bit more at our August meeting, but the goal of the light rail study is to think about all of the conditions that would be necessary from like an operational perspective. And then evaluation criteria will be used to evaluate some concepts that we will be giving to Sound Transit eventually. We expect 2027. So hoping to have the criteria developed, and then we'll dig into like up to 6 locations that could be a good spot for light rail. And then at the end of 2026, we'll have that community preferred location. So yeah, so yeah.
We're zipping through things, and we don't have a place for questions for that. But
Yeah,
is it okay?
I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Jen,
I have a request.
Yeah.
If we think we're gonna go over, can we schedule that to begin with so that we don't forget and have to run out at
Yeah.
8 o'clock? Sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. I'll work with the chairs. We can look over like sort of all the questions being asked. At this point, we don't have all the questions, or like the ICAP work has not really been in a completed form yet. So I can verify with the other group to make sure that we will be on time.
Or just extend it.
Or extend it. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's really a problem when some people have to leave. You have to leave at 8, and then some people are then left out at the last half of the discussion. But if the meeting is planned for to go on, then people can.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah.
I know this report.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't have much to say other than in September there will be an event called Week Without Driving. So many of you may know about this, but it was started by an advocacy group in Washington State. When I was actually in grad school, I learned about it, and it's now become a national thing. So it's something that is near and dear to me. It's also very challenging because the whole goal is to not drive that week. And you put yourself in the shoes of folks that are not able to drive or don't have access to a vehicle. And it really just sort of highlights the challenges that other folks might have. Or there are some people that just choose to not drive, and that's another thing. So it's really just an awareness campaign that highlights how challenging it is to get around, and sort of points to the picture that like transit service is really great, especially if you can't drive. So it is the week of September 29th through Sunday, October 5th. If anybody chooses to participate, I would support you in that. It is also very challenging to do. Probably one of the more challenging things one might do in a week. So just wanted to throw that out there. September 29th through October 5th is week without driving. It'll be the week before. Yeah.
I was kind of having a similar thought. It would be like if it was tab week.
We could hold a special meeting.
I can walk here, so.
Okay.
The chair report is right now a few things. But I gave Micah just a quick email thanking him for his years of service on the board and wished him the best. I know that we all wished him the best. Adam and I, chair and vice chair, approved all the rule changes that we made in the last meeting. It's been DocuSign and sent on to Tisha, and vote by August 5th. Able to vote. Ballot should be in the mail. And next is other business and announcements. Any business?
Yes, I wanted to give a quick update for the group. So last week we had a training event for chairs and vice chairs. So it was Mayor Mary Lou Pauley, City Clerk Tisha Geezer, who you may recognize from our training. Was that last month? Yeah, just recently. So the chair and vice chair training covered a lot of parliamentary procedure stuff. So it was kind of looking at, what is the chair's role and what is the vice chair's role when acting as the chair. In that part of the parliamentary procedure. So same stuff that we covered there. We also covered, how can the board be effective in communicating our messages? So when we want to have our ideas make it to council, how can we do that? So we talk more about, holds and votes. And in doing so, try to clarify the language so that staff can accurately represent our position when presenting that to council. The third thing that we talked about was a little bit about setting a work ethic for the board. So part of the chairs and vice chairs role is to try to, set a benchmark. And a lot of that has to do with coming prepared. So reading the material ahead of time and maybe talking with members, or at least being open to talk with members who have questions about how they can be more effective members of the board. So we had a little bit of discussion about that. That also, comes to staff's position on this. So if you're reading ahead of time and you have questions about things like run over, for example, that simply just mentioned, that would be a great thing to bring up ahead of time. Thomas is pretty good about getting us materials about a week in advance. And I'm sure you're open to getting emails from folks with any questions. We certainly don't want to put presenters on the spot with some huge question that they're not prepared to deal with, because that usually means that we have to go revisit the topic again. There's an opportunity when reading through the materials, if there's a big gap or something that needs clarification that the presenter might not be naturally preparing for, that's a great time to bring that up with staff. Send an email to Thomas. Thomas, do you want to add anything about how to communicate with you? Or?
Yeah, oftentimes I'm not the primary presenter, so happy to be the conduit if there's any talk.
And if you have no further business, Adam for going over that. I unfortunately missed the training, the HR training, but I think it's very useful. You listen that really well. Tisha said that it was like also a lot of it had a lot of overlap with kind of the statement she gave at last meetings. So for business, adjourned. Any consent?
Okay.
Sweet.